Good morning. All of you stand to attention, please. Oh, sorry. This morning's panel is to discuss the collaboration of large customers with utilities, and we're picking ourselves. I'm a consultant for the U.S. Army Office of Energy Initiatives. Dave Irwin is my client. He leads our project development activities. He's going to explain a little bit of why an Army needs energy resilience, what our needs are, how we have been working with the utility sector for over 8 years now in developing projects that support both the Army and the community. Good idea if the Army supports its local community as well. Steve Kiesner, he's here to represent the Edison Electric Institute. He'll give you a perspective of the investor-owned utilities, what they've been doing with us, and where they see customer collaboration. We've seen this whole theme all week about past business models being way too slow for the speed at which technology and business models are changing. And then we were going to have our good friend, but he is here in spirit, Phil Dion from American Electric Power, who has gone home to deal with the much higher calling of some family issues. So if you're tuning in, Phil, thank you for saying you'd come, but certainly more important to be home. And we have his pinch hitter, Jason Smith, who's the general manager over at Bright Canyon Energy, sister company of Arizona Power, who has gone through a similar voyage as to the one Phil has been with the Army to get a project that benefits both the Army and the community in the LA Basin. So just to give you a little bit of a warmer for the themes that we discuss, the Army has looked at what happens when the lights go out. That comes to be kind of important when you've got an important military mission. Dave's going to talk a little bit about how more and more it matters if the lights go out for the Army in what we call CONUS, the continental United States. But the theme of resilience has come up all week. So this is how we define it, and it comes close to many of the other definitions I've seen in the articles over the past year. Energy resilience means we have the ability first to avoid. We'd much rather not have the lights go out. But we have to prepare for when they do. When they do go out, we have to minimize the impact on our service members, the missions, and the families. And in order to try and keep those missions up, which rely a lot on the local community, we have to be able to adapt once the lights go out. We've seen a lot of transition in the past few years when originally it was, oh, we've got to power that. And now with the friends we talk to in the industry like Amazon Web Service, Microsoft, more and more it's, oh, maybe adapting is switching in less than 30 seconds from Seattle to Hong Kong. We don't do that, but that was one of the ones the Microsoft folk brought up. And finally, once the lights come back on, how do we recover? So that's energy resilience. Avoid, prepare for, minimize, adapt for, and recover. So we're going to go in sequence with Dave Irwin, starting to talk about the Army and how we're exploring energy resilience. Dave.
Thank you. So real quick, I'll just give an overview of who OEI is. So we're the Army Office of Energy Initiatives. We are headquartered out of the Pentagon, working for the Army Secretariat. We are the central office for the development of large-scale utility projects with utilities and developers on Army installations. We were stood up about 10 years ago now as a task force working on renewable projects, trying to get renewables on installations, pivoted under the last administration to a more energy resilience or energy assurance focus, and are now trying to integrate carbon-free energy and energy resilience into projects. Now that said, not every project can be carbon-free. The grid's just not there yet, and we'll highlight some projects that kind of dabble in that as well. The Army has some really strong goals. We just released the Army Climate Strategy. That is the Army's roadmap, if you will, to net zero by 2050. It identifies that we need both resilience and renewable or carbon-free energy. Some highlights from that are that we have a goal of 100% carbon-free energy by 2030, and that's really for all federal facilities, of which we are part and really probably the largest stakeholder. We have a goal of installing microgrids at every installation by 2035. We have a goal of 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from all Army buildings by 2032, based on a 2005 baseline, and net zero greenhouse gas emissions from Army installations by 2045. Additionally, we're seeking to electrify an all-electric our fleet for all light-duty, non-tactical vehicles by 2027. So we usually cycle through vehicles on a 5-year cycle. So as new vehicles are purchased through GSA, we anticipate all of those vehicles, to the extent that they're available, will be electric. And then finally, there's a goal of net zero emissions for all federal procurement by 2050. So these are some fairly ambitious goals, driven by the administration and by the assessment by the Department of Defense that climate risk is a risk to our missions. We recognize that the pot of funds to achieve these goals is only so big, and in looking at how do we accomplish that with the limited resources we have, collaboration really is the only way that we're going to get there. We share a lot of the same risk, goals, and desires as the communities that we reside in, and with the utilities that serve us, and especially in the regulated areas. We share similar vulnerabilities, and just like the rest of society, things are quickly and continuously being electrified and digitized. And that drives a different power profile for us. As Dave McGeown mentioned, right, we are very concerned about what happens when the lights go out, both from a mission perspective on the installation, but we also don't want to be that shining beacon on the hill when the rest of the town's dark. Our service members, many of them live in town. Our federal staff and defense contract support all live in town, right? So we need them to be able to focus on their jobs, and they're not going to do that when their family's sitting in the cold and the dark. So it's bigger than just out to our fence line. We'd like to see our communities that we reside in be equally beneficially affected by these projects. With that, I think I probably turn it over to you, right? It probably summarizes where we're at.
Yeah, that's a great segue into my comments here, Dave. First of all, for those that are unfamiliar with the Edison Electric Institute, we are the Association of Investor-Owned Electric Utility Companies based in Washington, D.C. One of the hats that I wear is I run our outreach activities for all large customers. That includes our national accounts customers, national corporate customers, federal agencies, as well as the Department of Defense. Now, I'll preface my comments with just going over two really big priorities in our industry. One, we are in a significant transformation to clean the grid, make the grid more dynamic, more responsive, more secure, and again, much more cleaner. The other thing, this goes along with this, we're investing a significant amount of money. Collectively, our members are spending about $120 billion per year. That's been going on for roughly 10 years now. Where are those investments going? Clean energy, generation, transmission and distribution. Again, making the grid smarter and much more secure. So I bring that up because when we're talking about partnerships with large customers, you can start with, say, corporate customers. We know, we heard this throughout the conference, that corporate customers, are really focused now more than ever on sustainability, reducing their carbon footprint. I really couldn't say that about 8 years ago. Maybe there was a handful of companies that had sustainability goals, carbon goals, but that has, fast forward to today, and just about every corporate customer has those very, very aggressive carbon reduction goals. So they're looking for partners in this renewable space, clean energy, 24/7. That's become a bigger and bigger priority to them. With the military, I've been working with military and federal agencies for roughly 12, 13 years now. And it really, EEI started to focus on the military customers after a report came out by the Defense Science Board that basically, which the Defense Science Board is this blue ribbon panel that looked at, for this particular study, it looked at vulnerabilities that exist at domestic military installations. And their conclusion in their 1,200-page report, I'll give you the elevator speech here, was the missions of the military have grown much more in importance domestically. In other words, the wars are being fought at these domestic installations. And to use a term from the military, the homeland is no longer a safe sanctuary, meaning that there's symmetrical and asymmetrical threats out there, cyber attacks, physical threats. The adversaries, and we certainly recognize this, the adversaries to adversely impact a military installation, they go to the infrastructure providers, the electricity providers. So not only was that DSB report a wake-up call for the military, but it was a wake-up call for our industry as well, recognizing that a very, very large customer now has big concerns about their ability to accomplish their mission should the grid go down, for the commercial grid that they rely on go down for a sustained period of time. So again, I prefaced this whole conversation on we're investing significantly to harden, strengthen the grid, make it cleaner, and we're also working with our large customers on military resilience. So after this DSB report came up, as I mentioned before, EEI was really dialed in working, engaging the DoD leadership, and working on inside defense solutions that could assuage their concerns in case the grid goes down. And that's where our relationship really started with the Army Office of Energy Initiatives. I think we met roughly 10 years ago, and I think my first message was, okay, you guys are concerned. We're concerned because you're concerned. And meanwhile, we're transitioning, we're transforming significantly. So how do we tap into, or how do we align each other's goals? Again, are there opportunities to really tap in, align the investments that we're making with your needs that are happening inside your fence line? And there's some great examples of what's been done thus far that I'll discuss later. I'll turn it over to Jason for now, though.
Great, thanks. Good morning, everybody. Jason Smith, again, with Bright Canyon Energy. We're a developer of energy infrastructure, and as David mentioned in the opening comments, we're a subsidiary of Pinnacle West Capital Corporation, our publicly traded parent company, but also a sister company to Arizona Public Service, which is the largest of the 3 electric utilities in the state of Arizona. And we've been working both on the APS side of the house and on the Bright Canyon side of the house to go out and collaborate with the Army and other branches of the DoD to help improve energy resiliency across several different installations. So going to focus on, in my remarks here this morning, one project that we're working on that we're getting ready to announce at JFTB Los Alamitos, Joint Forces Training Base at Los Alamitos in Los Angeles. But we've been working with the Army Office of Energy Initiatives for several years now on bringing this project to fruition. So very excited to be able to go through some of the highlights with everyone here this morning. But as Steve was mentioning, the importance of these installations to our communities, not just for the national defense posture, but the importance of these installations and the immediate surrounding communities. Los Alamitos serves as a training base for the Army, as well as the California National Guard. But in a disaster or emergency scenario, it also becomes the rallying point for all of the first responders in Southern California that would aid in disaster recovery. So you think about the importance of this installation to Southern California and our national defense posture, and it's a very, very critical installation. So where we're headed, and let me paint a picture of where we're headed together, and then I'll step back and give you a little bit of a timeline and history of how we got here, because I think that all helps support the collaboration theme that we're trying to touch on here this morning. But the microgrid itself is going to consist of 31 megawatts of solar, 40 megawatt hours of battery storage, and about 3 megawatts of Tier 4 final diesel generators. So this system, when we build this system and bring it online next year, during normal grid conditions, it will serve the customers in the broader Southern California region. But then in a grid emergency event, all those resources will point inward and serve the installation and keep the installation online. So we're very excited. We're going to be breaking ground on this project next month in May and be bringing it online into operation in Q2 of 23. And we've been, in the spirit of collaboration, we've been working very closely with 2 utilities in particular. Call out San Diego Gas and Electric as the offtake utility. So during normal grid conditions, we are selling the energy and capacity coming out of the solar and battery elements of the project, the microgrid, to San Diego Gas and Electric under a long-term power purchase agreement. And then Southern California Edison is our interconnecting utility. And Southern California Edison, as a partner in this project, microgrids operate in a very unique space that we are at the meter. We're not behind the meter, we're not in front of the meter, we're at the meter. So we can face both the customer, the inward-facing customer, and the wholesale grid at the same time. And so what that does is it straddles basically 2 different tariff regimes between a wholesale export tariff and a behind-the-meter tariff. But it also straddles a lot of operational controls that we need to put in place. So you think about the collaboration that needs to occur with Southern California Edison and their distribution interconnection team that we're working very closely with to make sure that when there is a grid event, that we have all of the timing and all of the protections set up so that we can seamlessly transition. We can immediately respond to that grid event, and then be able to seamlessly transition Los Alamitos back to Southern California Edison service at the end of that grid event. So the collaboration that's needed to occur with SDG&E, with SoCalEd, with the Army has been significant across this entire effort. When we design our microgrids, we think about 3 primary metrics: capacity, ramp time, and duration. So capacity, we've designed this system to basically serve the entire load at the installation. From a ramp time perspective, and let me back up 1 second, side note, that's important because right now a lot of the installations are actually using smaller, less efficient, less reliable emergency backup generators to reinforce some of the critical infrastructure at these installations. When we go in and put in a microgrid at the scale that we're talking about, the microgrid is able to power the entire installation, so not just the critical load, but the entire installation, and it helps improve the reliability of that system, which is important for the installation, but also helps reduce maintenance costs for the installation because you're not needing to maintain the emergency generators as much as they have been historically. From a ramp time perspective, that once a grid event happens, we'll be able to get the installation back up and running within minutes. And then from a duration perspective, we've designed this microgrid to allow the installation to electrically island from the grid for up to 14 days if needed in an extreme event. So we're very excited about where we're headed with the Army and this marquee project that we've been working on. So now let me step back and give you a sense of how we got here. And bear with me for a second while I go through a brief timeline, but I think this will help reinforce the importance of all the collaboration that has happened. So I'm going to take you back to 2018. So in January of 2018, the Army released and Bright Canyon responded to an RFI for a potential microgrid at JFTB Los Alamitos. April of that year, we applied for an interconnection with Southern California Edison, the interconnecting utility, which interconnections for wholesale export take somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 years by the time you get through all the study process. So that is a long lead time process that we've been going at from the early days. In May of 2018, the Army hosted an industry day. In August, Bright Canyon submitted a proposal to the Army. That was all in 2018. In 2019, the Army selected Bright Canyon's proposal. We then began negotiating what's called a business terms agreement, but this basically, think of it as a land option agreement that allowed us, Bright Canyon, to have land control and go out and represent to utilities that we had a potential project that they could buy offtake from. So then it was in December of 2020 that we executed the power purchase agreement with San Diego Gas and Electric for the solar and battery storage components of the project. And then in March of 2021, we executed the generator interconnection agreements with Southern California Edison. So that's what allows us to export out to Southern California Edison's grid. All the time that we were working on this, the Army was working through the federal permitting process and the NEPA process, which concluded last year. And you think about all the collaboration that needs to go into describing the microgrid, the facility, going through the permitting process, the evaluations, et cetera. So that concluded summer of last year, which was a great milestone that resulted in a FONSI, finding of no significant impact. And then in February of 2022, we ultimately signed the lease with the Army that gave us definitive land control for a 30-year lease at the installation. And that then allowed us to immediately go in and close our financing, our project financing, non-recourse financing earlier this year, and work with our lenders. So, each of those steps required tremendous collaboration with the entire Army team, SDG&E, Southern California Edison, and others in our development team. But you step back, and I think the benefits of the microgrid, again, during normal grid conditions, we have now a solar and battery resource that's going to come online in the LA load pocket. And I think everyone appreciates how difficult it is to develop resources in load pocket these days. So great to have that resource right there in the LA load pocket. And then during a grid emergency, we now have a resource that can point inward, keep the Army installation up and running, and allow it to serve the interest of the national defense of our country and the local community through the first responder mission that the base fulfills. So very excited to be working with you guys on all of this, and looking forward to breaking ground here next month.
And so are we. I think then that would represent about 8 years since I set foot on this funny little air base. And by the way, translation, we keep saying installations. A base in Army lingo is an installation. So I set foot on that base about 8 years ago. We're not going to do anything here. There's strawberries and spinach and all that stuff over the other side. And here we are now, just as we love to say, ready to turn dirt. But why is all this relevant? So the Army and the utility and the industry talk together. Big deal for everybody. So in this theme of the Energy Thought Summit, I believe it's relevant to all of us, because what we are learning here as a very large customer, we have everything from small residential to large residential to industrial. We represent your typical city. So it's kind of interesting. We were remarking, listening to the panelists just before us, who have very similar issues in serving a city as a utility and working with that city. But all of the trends that you've heard in the past 4 days hit us and are ones that we have to manage. We're located in the Secretariat, which is up at the Pentagon, because we need to be able to get very, very quickly to the Army's ultimate decision makers on, will we give Bright Canyon a piece of land? And I remind you, I'm a contractor, so when I say we, it's a bit of a liberal. I never actually represent the actual federal government. Only Dave can do that. But the trends that you see in there of what do we care about? tongue-in-cheek conversation with a few of you. We look outside Fort Bragg right now, and you heard the Duke discussions, where it is now more profitable to convert the sunshine into electrons through solar than it is to grow tobacco. Well, that has some pretty big impacts on the distribution grids, as you've heard many of the vendors and utilities talk about this week. So as we talk to each other, we're worried about what happens as we get to this 100% carbon pollution-free utopia that we're headed for. How does the grid change when there are now thousands of generators? Because our fathers and grandfathers, thank you God there are more and more ladies now, but it used to be fathers and grandfathers, built this system for a different time. It built it for a time in which we've seen too often on the news that there are folk in the United States that get very agitated. We're concerned about how agitated they can get, and we now draw maps in collaboration with the utility about where there are the points where that could be vulnerable to physical attack. And we talk a lot about cyber, but there's a heck of a lot of damage can be done with an F-150 and a tow chain. We do worry about that. So this collaboration, I think, represents all of you that out there are electricity users as we look at the threats of weather, cyber, and actual physical attack, but also the need to, in normal operations, just to have nice, clean, safe, affordable, and reliable electricity. And those conversations lead us to some of the stuff we're going to ask Steve to talk about in a second here about the speed at which our conversations need to occur. My first job, having come from, I don't know if I'm wearing a white hat or a black hat, but I came from the utility sector, was looking at utility integrated resource plans. And we kind of went around a little bit begging, oh, we see you just launched an IRP and you're putting 200 megawatts of solar on. Could we have a piece of that on our land, and does it make sense to you? Those were the days of the President Obama gigawatt goal. In those few short years, everything has changed about how we talk to each other, but the key is in the collaboration. We need to talk to each other sooner. And difficult for a military and a government-based organization where procurement is generally about buying things. And there can sometimes be a little bit of a sense of the people on the other side are the enemy because you're driving to get the lowest, cheapest price you can. In this, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's much more a value proposition in which a deal is one in which we need to talk to each other, build genuine friendships over the years in which we've got to share information. But the key for today is to expose you to some of the stuff that we have been allowed to, in the interest of national security, share with utility senior executives. I heard somebody make a crack the other day about the utility guys being the bottlenecks. That's gone. About the utility transmission distribution guys, I had that job, and in those days, about 10, 15 years ago, transmission distribution didn't deal with those people who talked to those dirty things, customers. We don't talk to customers. As a result of some of Steve's activity, we now talk to transmission distribution about what's going on in their systems, where the vulnerabilities are, and how we can all achieve our goals. So Steve, maybe if you could lead us through the MOU.
Yeah, let me give you a little background here, give you a real-life story. A couple of years ago, we bring in, for whenever there's like a big federal DOD meeting gathering, I would bring in our members the night before and just have a private meeting with those members. And when the chance when we can, we would bring in like the assistant secretary. In this case, or in this example, we had Assistant Secretary Beeler from the Army, who's the assistant secretary at the time. We had him address just, again, a small gathering of our members the night before this big meeting started. And, you know, the secretary said, this is what the Army needs. We're looking for opportunities to collaborate with EEI members or electric companies in general in ways that could obviously benefit the electric company and their other customers, but also help us with our inside the fence solutions and concerns that we have about being able to operate should the grid go down. So he cited a few examples, and what really struck me was we went around the table for EEI members to comment, and there were like 2 or 3 of them one of them in particular said, boy, I wish we had this conversation about 2 weeks ago because we just decided, or we just got this transmission project approved and we could have incorporated your needs with what we're doing in terms of that investment. And a couple other folks chimed in, yeah, I wish we talked 2 months ago because we have this asset we wanted to put somewhere, and boy, it would have made a lot of sense if we knew what the Army was looking for. So I bring that up as an example, and Jason, you brought up another example of some issues that the Army and the industry should solve together, and that's one, how do we communicate better? How do we coordinate our investments, the needs of the Army? And then once we get there, how do we cut down the amount of time to get stuff done? So another story I want to tell you and how we got to this MOU. About 2 years ago, one of our CEOs sat down with the same assistant secretary and almost the same subject. Boy, we're missing opportunities left and right to align our investments, our significant investments that we're making with the needs of the Army and, for that matter, the other services. And, in that conversation, both of them acknowledged, yeah, there's communication and coordination issues that we should resolve. And, that was the whole idea behind this MOU, which we signed about a year ago, a little under a year ago with the Army. Basically, it's centered around joint resiliency planning. How do we work together when we're looking especially at resiliency to, again, align the electric company needs, the needs of their other customers with the needs of the emerging resiliency needs with the Army and, for that matter, the other military bases. Both the CEO and the assistant secretary admitted that there's frustration on both sides of the fence. And I'll let Dave talk to this more if he wants, but on the utility side or the electric company side, we're frustrated because in many, many cases, we're being left out of the conversations, the initial conversations that installations are having around energy resiliency. One of the CEOs on the panel mentioned the importance of the electric company being involved because we have that 360 sight line. But meanwhile, there's just too many examples out there where the military's trying to figure out how they're going to address their resiliency needs and totally leaving us out of the equation. Some of that can be chalked up to, I hate to throw things at them too much, but contracting officers, they don't necessarily understand the connection between electric companies, especially regulated electric companies, and the military installations. A lot of times contracting officers or legal folks within the Pentagon will say, well, this should be competitively bid, or this is a competitive issue. So, you can't have these conversations with the electric companies. That's a big problem that, again, the MOU hopes to address or is addressing. But the other thing on the Army side, I hear this from Dave a lot. We don't know what we don't know, meaning we don't know what the electric company is planning outside our fence line, or where those vulnerabilities lie, or what do they think, how are they going to address some of the vulnerabilities that could impact our missions on our base. There was just this black hole or lack of information. So that kind of sums up the frustration on both sides of the fence.
Yeah, I was going to say, we often look out to the fence line and up beyond, right? And we just trust that electricity came yesterday, it'll be here today, it'll be here tomorrow, right? And we've historically approached generation, I think to your point, was if it needs to be resilient, we'll put a generator in the back of that building and call it good. And there's a more holistic way to do that, and I think a more financially savvy way to do that, right? We can buy a generator, we could buy a bunch of generators, we have, but then we have to maintain that generator, feed that generator, do all the things you do with generators that sit around waiting for a bad day. When you have developers that provide services to the grid, or utility companies that own that grid, that are going to own assets, they can make money with that all day, every day. They're incentivized to take care of it and make sure it runs, and they're obliged through contract or through the law, depending on the entity, to ensure that reliability, and this helps them do that for us. So it to me, right, that's a really good win-win, and it's about talking to each other so you understand what our goals and desires are, as well as what keeps us up at night. And I think, the MOUs really helped us get to a point where, hey, we're not going to share all the secrets with you, but we can at least share enough that you can understand what our concerns are and what kinds of things might need to be undertaken to address those to some level. And it's an opportunity for you to, the utilities, to share stuff with us. So, we looked at the fence line. I know where our substation is at. I couldn't tell you what happens beyond that.
Yeah.
I think there's a good exchange both ways to this MOU that's been piloted with Dominion.
Yeah, it's a it's a great opportunity to work together to figure out where those opportunities lie and exploit them, take advantage of them. And again, those opportunities really get down to the alignment of goals and what we're doing on our side of the fence to invest. But it's also about identifying the gaps and trying to resolve the gaps. For instance, one gap when it comes to these communication issues, there's classified information out there, or at least perceptions that some information, important information that the electric company would need to know to provide resiliency solutions or to provide information around resiliency. There's that needs to be worked out, and that's part of what this MOU is about. It's really identifying how information can be appropriately shared and what information that is. One of the things that we're learning, and Dave brought this up, we're using our member Dominion and their base, Fort Belvoir, Virginia, which is just outside the Beltway in Northern Virginia. We're using them as a pilot installation. And one thing that we're learning when it comes to information sharing is it's not learning, it's just, bringing out into the open that the electric company, when it comes to eventually providing solutions or coming up with solutions, we don't need to know what every mission is on the base, where it is, and all that. There's just certain bits of information that's needed where that we need to know about, and we're able to provide the service, the solution. Conversely, too, it's the military is hesitant to provide information. There's some uncertainty about what information, how it can be provided. On the electric company's side, we don't really advertise or put up on billboards our transmission and distribution maps. But that type of information could be very important to a military base. As part of this exercise at Fort Belvoir, especially, it sounds a little mundane, but just sharing that type of information, we've found solutions as to how to do that without, providing information that the electric company would be concerned about if that happens. So it's thus far, this is sort of an ongoing project, but we're already learning a lot from the discovery. And I just want to advertise on the back table, we have a 2-page summary as to the status, where we are on this particular project. One thing that sort of that next step is we're going to document this, make it a roadmap, develop the best practices that could be shared, not just with Army installations and other electric companies besides Dominion, but it could be really shared throughout the services, the Navy and the Air Force. There's a lot of applicability there in some of the findings. I would just want to give my tip of the hat to the Office of Energy Initiatives. They're they put a team together to work with EEI and its members on developing this. Fort Belvoir is a great example, but if you heard from Dave and Dave, or if you've had conversations with Dave and others in the military, you'll often hear comment coming from them that basically is, if you've seen one military installation, you've seen one military installation. So we would like to pilot this with at least another one or two more installations to make sure we've got a good sample, good representation as to what best practices could come about. And again, that could be followed by other electric companies as well as military installations.
Yeah, and we've already had, it's like the announcement of the party. Oh, you had a party at Dominion, and a bunch of other utilities are all saying to us, oh, well, we really need to understand that. As we're getting close to the finish line here, I'm going to leave a couple of minutes to get some questions. But bringing it back to the Thought Leadership Summit, I think the relevance of this. All of the issues that we're dealing with are relevant to cities and large customers, and eventually to residential. So the lessons learned in that MOU about the speed of communication, the kind of things that you need to communicate, are, I think, important in where this whole industry is going. So, Jason, do you have anything in this last conversation about how we've collaborated, some of the real pain points you've got? Because he may not quite look it, but he's a very patient man. The number of late-night phone calls, which you don't normally expect in a military environment for doing a power deal, about, did they just say that? They just sent me this notice. What are we going to do? We've had to work through all of those. So any comments on that before we go to open questions?
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, anyone who's been through a project finance, non-recourse project financing process understands the diligence that's entailed there. Obviously, one of those things is getting a lease executed and being able to demonstrate to your lenders that you have land control for a 30-year period. So the process that we went through to get the lease executed and get that finally approved and executed, was one of those hurdles that we overcame together. But we got there and got it done. But collaboration around that was key, and getting started on that early was key, so that you had time to work that through your internal approval processes.
Yep. So if we had a live background, instead of a heart behind Dave, it should be a bit of a halo. Because what you end up with is you are looking at a government official that understands project financing, understands what it takes to get these projects in the ground for this future that we're all going towards the 2050 carbon pollution free. And that's pretty unusual. So in the center of innovation, by the way, Austin is the Army Center of Innovation. You should know that Army's Future Command, which is looking across all Army needs for these kind of things, is hosted here. So Joyce, in the last minute or so, were there any good questions that you think the audience would...
Dave, do you mind if I throw one thing in real quick?
So
an ask, if there's any regulators or resource planners or resource procurement team, either in the audience or listening, try and set up the evaluation criteria for utility procurement to include benefits and evaluation of critical infrastructure, military customers, hospitals, et cetera, so that when the procurement teams are evaluating, what is going to be procured, what resources are going to be procured, that they have the flexibility and the allowance and the support to evaluate these critical infrastructure projects that can serve both the broader community and the military customers. So
Yeah.
right.
There's
So being
so many
the
opportunities.
military, we are going to finish on time. Aircraft kind of get you incentivized to finish on time, but can we go one question?
The only hand we can see from here is that one.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. I'm a former chief executive was a very large business developing microgrids from 2000 to 2011. I've since retired and I'm a member of a board of directors that's investing in the next generation of technologies that could be used for green energy microgrids. So I applaud, first of all, what the Army has published in your strategy to get in 2030 and 2050 for microgrid evolutions and clean energy. When my interest is what are some of the emerging technologies that you think will be important? I didn't hear any mention of long-term storage. I believe it will be one of them will be green hydrogen that you can produce, use as a fuel and as energy storage capability on your grids. I hope that diesel generators are removed and various forms, whether it's natural gas or green hydrogen, are used through fuel cells to generate the electricity locally. So you don't have that supply chain issue of getting diesel fuel or anything delivered to the Army bases. Thank you. Would you please comment on some of the next generation technologies you're thinking of?
We're at time, so Dave, why don't you take that? And thank you, everybody. We'll close out on Dave's answer.
So I will say that we're not in the business of picking winners, but we know there are a lot of things that are emerging. The Army has, and DOD at large, has really looked at integrating renewables and battery storage into our appropriated funding projects or funded projects. So that is moving in that direction. The item of interest to us is, how much value does that bring, right? If we go buy a battery, it just serves us. In some markets, it makes a lot of sense, right? You can do peak shaving, et cetera. But that goes back to working with our industry partners, both utilities and developers, to say, hey, what makes sense? What's ready to deploy? And I would expect as hydrogen becomes readily available, as some of these other technologies become readily available, those developers and those utility companies will bring those to us and say, we're going to locate that here. And a quick story just to highlight how that's happened, right? With technology that's not new today. Our initial PV projects, the utilities brought PV onto installations at several places. And we have some of those same utilities coming back to us now saying, hey, the time's right to put batteries on our grid. We're going to locate them on the installation, attach that PV array. And the Army has come back in some cases and tied back to that so that we can have that as resilient power. Should the grid go down, it switches to us. So we still buy the electrons, right? We're not stealing them. But there's not a ratepayer or a customer base reason to fund that connection, so we fund that. That's not really defensible. For things where it's privately acquired, right, that becomes part of the deal that we work out with that developer to allow access to our land. So
well, there comes a shepherd's hook. Thank you all for listening. Yes. Oh, we're
Sorry.
getting extra.
Wait a second. We
must
actually
have done
have
well.
someone in the audience who has an answer to the question from a federal perspective that we'd love to turn the mic over to.
Hello, and in answer to Jason Smith's question, and representing the female regulators in the room, Commissioner Bocanegra here, former Commissioner Stasi Oliva, and also former Commissioner Lorena Kiba from the state of Hawaii, as you know, which is headquarters for PACOM. But in response to your question, NARUC, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, has initiated a very important program, which is the Defense Critical Energy Infrastructure Initiative. We are putting together a guidebook for state regulators, the state commissions, in terms of how to build and improve on partnerships with the defense community and large customers, and working with utilities in their states. So a white paper was just published last year in the end of the year, September 2021. There will be another guidebook that will be issued shortly. We're working on that. I'm part of the advisory group working on that with the former Commissioner Rick Moroz, who you might know from some of your cybersecurity work. So we are definitely working on it, and it is very important. Partnerships with the defense community is important. Clean energy is top of mind for many states that have requirements to get to 100% decarbonization and 100% clean energy. And because energy security is national security, so we're seeing the geopolitical events unfold in Ukraine as we are here today. So just wanted to give you an update.
Yeah,
Totally.
very well aware. We're
Hats
intimate.
off to NARUC for doing that because it's super important. I do want to also, since you're from Hawaii, really recognize what is a fantastic project and a great example of what we're trying to accomplish elsewhere. But a couple years ago, Schofield Barracks, an Army, very important Army base on Oahu, and Hawaiian Electric partnered on a deal where a 50 megawatt generation plant, biofuel backed, with Black Start capabilities, was built on military land, on Schofield Barracks land. That was significant because, one, it helps the electric company and the rest of the customers A lot of the generation on Oahu is near the shoreline, so it's susceptible to tsunamis. So Schofield is on much higher land, and if you checked out real estate prices in Hawaii, it's pretty expensive. So it was really win-win-win deal. Win for the Army because they have backup power to sustain themselves, and renewable sources as well, but also a huge win for the electric company and the rest of the companies. So perfect example of a partnership that should be replicated elsewhere. And getting back to the MOU, that's one of the areas. How do we drive more of those type
And
of
ma'am, we
projects?
just didn't have time to cover
follow
the,
that.
we didn't have time to cover the whole field, but the Army is an associate member of NARUC. We participate with Critical Infrastructure Committee, the Electric Committee, and we did have last set of eyes on that memo, and we're currently working with your team in the NARUC going beyond DCEI, which is the top level of defense needs, into the kind of stuff we're talking here. So there's a much greater need than just in that white paper. But we didn't get time to include, of course, collaboration with the regulatory environment and the community is as vital as everybody else. So thank you. 6 minutes over. We're getting off the stage.
Let's go ahead and give them a round of applause, everybody. Thank you so much. Absolutely. Before you guys go anywhere, we have a couple more things that come in your way, so stay